So let's, backing up to the basic question of who belongs. This question has to do with membership. Who should be a member and on what grounds membership should be granted to a person, or membership also is, we could use the word citizen. Who should be a citizen of a country? And this is a very, very important consideration, a very basic question of justice, because who is granted citizenship determines who has rights in that society. A second related question to citizenship or membership is standing. Who should have standing in the what should be, should we have equal standing or unequal standing, basically is the question. Standing refers to our place, our legitimate place as a citizen in the society. And historically, standing has been highly unequal based upon mainly ascriptive characteristics: race, gender, religious belief, social class, which are, from a moral point of view, arbitrary. And so we've lived a long time, and to some degree our own society remains hierarchical in that not everyone has full equal standing, it seems. But the normative question is, should every person, every citizen have equal standing, or would you argue in terms of unequal standing? So that's the meaning of the question of who belongs. We turn then to the alternative principles, and that's an important section of your project. What principles should guide the determination of citizenship? On what basis should citizenship be determined? There's a generally established, very established human right, which was first expressed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, that everyone has a basic right to membership or citizenship in a nation state, and no one should be stateless. Everyone has a right to membership. And also everyone has a right to change their citizenship, that is to leave the country they were born in. So, and those are well established, that each person has, and this is universal, each person has a human right to citizenship and to change, and also to change their citizenship. There is an argument, very potent and perpetual, it seems, argument in terms of how we should determine membership, and that is citizenship should be determined by ethno-nationalism or tribalism. And that's at play in all human societies still, including the United States. The argument that to be a citizen, one needs to be a part of the racial, ethnic, and or cultural group, the dominant group of that society. So we hear this, for example, from white Christian nationalists in our own country, that if you're not white and you're not a Christian, and that often excludes Catholics, if you're not a Christian, you're not really an American. Real Americans are white and Christian. Everyone else they might be here and they might have some place, but they're not really Americans, right? So that's the idea of determining citizenship based upon one's ethnicity. In our own history, for example, in the 19th century, after the Civil War, the Congress passed a Immigration Act or a Naturalization Act. And in that act, they excluded persons of Chinese origin from ever attaining citizenship in the United States. So even if you were born in that particular piece of legislation, even if you were born in the United States, if you're of Chinese, if your parents are Chinese, were Chinese or are Chinese, you are denied citizenship. So that of course was overturned, but that idea of determining membership by one's ethnicity runs deep, and it's connected to our tribalism, our tendencies to favor our in-group and to have hostility to the out-group. And that seems to be always at play. So that's one principle. Ethno-nationalism is one principle for determining who belongs. And we would ask, is that fair? Is that consistent with the elements of fairness, equality, recognition, reciprocity, impartiality? The second principle, which is generally accepted in most places, including our own country, is citizenship determined by right of birth. So any baby who is born in the United States or born to American citizens, their parents are American citizens, automatically have a claim to a right to citizenship. So I was born in the United States. Upon my birth, I was a citizen. And so most of you were as well, if not all of you. Some of you have come from other places. So, and that's pretty well established, citizenship by right of birth. The question that arises, should we allow naturalization? Should we allow persons who are not born in the United States or in X country, should they be allowed to immigrate to that country? And on what grounds should they be allowed to immigrate? And that's a huge question of justice and a controversial one. So it's citizenship by naturalization. And this, the question of naturalization, the question of immigration, is at its most basic level a question of how open or closed the boundaries or the borders of a country should be. How porous, in other words, should the boundaries be of the nation? And that's a question that every nation has to decide for themselves. One argument is that we should have open borders. We should have open borders. That is, anyone who wants to come in is welcome. Anyone can be a citizen. All you have to do within open borders is to claim your desire to be a citizen. This was, to a degree, has been tried in Europe, in the European Union. Once you have citizenship in one European nation, a member of the European Union, you can live and work, etc., in any other European Union nation. So that's a version of open borders, but not fully open borders, because there are restrictions, especially around political considerations. So that's one option, open borders. The second option, its opposite, is closed borders. Should a nation choose to, would it be fair for a nation to choose to have completely closed borders? Not to allow not consider any claim of immigration from the outside. Should we close the border? Should we build a wall on all, hermetically sealing the nation from any outside influence? A prominent historical example of this was Japan. Japan in the 18th century completely closed its borders and wouldn't even allow any visitor, especially a Western visitor, to the islands of Japan. Actually, Commodore Perry, whose Perrysburg is named after, here not too far from here on the Maumee River, broke that barrier as a U.S. naval officer. He brought down he breached the Japanese sealed border, and that led to various consequences. That's an example. North Korea is pretty closed, very difficult even to visit, let alone to immigrate. Not that you would want to immigrate to North Korea, but they have pretty close borders. So that's one option, and that's floated to some degree now and again in our own country. We have to close the border, especially around certain groups. Donald Trump's famous Muslim ban is an example. He called, during his 2016 campaign, he called for and then tried to enact, when he became president, tried to enact a ban on persons of Islamic faith from entering the country. Totally ridiculous and unconstitutional and unfair, but he tried to do it. An example, well, we should close the border to these people. It was a complete, it turned out to be a mess, right? And it was struck down. But it's an example of a closed mentality about borders. So that's the second option. A third option is selective immigration, and that's generally the stance of most nations, including our own, that we will welcome people to enter our country, and to be residents and then to be citizens if they meet certain qualifications. So, but the nation wants to be selective in who it admits and who it doesn't admit. So that's selective immigration is the third option regarding the question of closed or open borders. So selective immigration is really a combination of the two. We're open but not completely open. We're open but selective. You have to be admitted. You have to apply, like a college. You have to apply. When the college doesn't take everyone, you have to apply and be admitted based upon the criteria of admission. So I want to go to Harvard. I have to apply and meet the standards of admission. Same with citizenship here through immigration. Any questions on that? That seems pretty straightforward. But there's a choice here that we need to make, a choice between open and closed borders, completely open borders, closed borders, with some variation of selection, which is a combination of open and closed. Make sense? Big important question, right? Very controversial in many ways. It can easily become and has become politicized in many ways. Certain political factions will use immigration as a tool, as a weapon to drum up votes, and not want to really do anything about it because it works in their political favor. But that's another story. So then we have to consider the principles of immigration. On what if we would choose a selective immigration position, we would ask on what grounds what should be the standards of the selection? What principles can we refer to guide our decisions about immigration? Who gets in and who doesn't? And there's a series of principles. First, the first principle is, again, the ethno-nationalist principle, that we will, one principle is only persons of a particular ethnic or racial or cultural group should be considered to be citizens. So if you want to immigrate, for example, to Saudi Arabia, you have to be a Muslim. Even, I don't know if it's even possible to immigrate to Saudi Arabia, but let's say it is. And they would certainly insist, right, that you'd be a Muslim by faith. In fact, you can't even go to certain cities as a visitor in Saudi Arabia, Mecca and Medina in particular, especially Mecca. It's sealed from all non-Muslims. So you can't even enter the city because it's a belief in the holiness of the space.
When you term immigration, do you mean like moving there completely, or just like for work? Like, how would you term that as?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. There is a distinction here between citizenship, applying for citizenship, or applying for a work visa, to be a resident and work without being a citizen. And many people choose to immigrate in the latter sense of just not wanting to be a political citizen, but just wanting to stay in the country for work purposes. And one can live their whole life as a permanent resident without seeking citizenship. I know a person, he's English, came to the United States as a young man, maybe in his early 20s. He's now in his 50s. He's never become a citizen and doesn't want to be a citizen, but he's benefited greatly from working in the country and being a permanent resident. He's even married to an American citizen, but wants to remain a British citizen. So, and that's perfectly legitimate, and that's allowable under most principles. But the big enchilada, if you will, the prize is remain citizenship. And yeah, remain citizenship. So one principle is that we have to consider this, and if we find it unacceptable, to demonstrate that it is unfair to base immigration status on one's ethnicity. And I think it can be strongly argued, based upon the elements of fairness, that such a principle is unfair and unacceptable, unjustifiable. That citizenship shouldn't, or either permanent residence or citizenship should not be based in ethnicity. I would argue for that. But it remains an open, people disagree about that. The second possibility of entry, of initial entry, a principle of political asylum is well established, and both in international and in U.S. law, that a person can request entry into the country and be given residency and then possible citizenship down the road if they are fleeing their country based upon persecution, political persecution, that their fundamental human rights are being violated in their own country, and they leave that country, which is their right, and they seek asylum in another country. And seeking the right to political asylum includes a right to be considered for citizenship. And there's, of course, a process, legal process through which asylum seekers go through in order to be vetted, that their claim is legitimate, that they are legitimately being persecuted, and that they are legitimately requesting asylum. So that's one principle, political asylum. And we could, again, ask, is that fair? Is political asylum justifiable from a moral point of view? The third principle here of immigration is the idea of a civic identity. And the standard of admission here is we will consider you for citizenship if you understand and affirm our political values and principles as a nation. That is, are you buying into our political framework? Do you accept and affirm the principles upon which this society is based? And this is independent of any other ascriptive characteristic. Anyone, from a civic identity point of view, everyone should be considered who is willing to accept the basic principles of the society. And in many ways, the United States is founded upon that principle of civil identity, for the most part. That what makes you American is not your ethnicity, or your religion, or your cultural group, or your race. What makes you a citizen is what you believe, what you accept and affirm in principle. So that's the idea of civic identity as a principle of immigration. A fourth principle is economic benefit, and this is very prominent in thinking about immigration. It's the principle of the immigrant must be capable of making an economic contribution to the society. They should have some skill or some benefit. They should provide some economic benefit to the society. So that's an economic principle. It is often, there are complaints about bringing in immigrants on economic grounds, on economic benefit grounds, often expressed in terms of, well, if this immigrant group, if we bring them in the country, they'll take away our jobs. They will hurt us. In other words, they won't have an economic benefit to us, whoever us might be, a particular group of workers, et cetera. And that, you've heard that, right? And politicians campaign on this point that if we have too many immigrants, they'll hurt certain groups of workers, and therefore we should limit the number of immigrants. From this perspective, a nation tends to want to recruit or to admit persons of high economic value, engineers, for example. are almost always welcome, etc. Also, but on the labor side of the equation, there are some kinds of work that Americans or other nationals don't want to do, like labor, farm labor, picking crops in a field. Very difficult, grueling, hard work. In fact, in certain states of the United States wrote laws that restricting the amount of migrant workers in law, and the jobs went unfilled, causing a panic in I think this was in North Carolina, among the agricultural elite. What are you doing? We need these people. Actually, Americans took the job and lasted a few hours on the job, walked off because it was too hard. Your average American found it too difficult. So, economic benefit. And this, one could argue, this principle should be regulated or constrained by two other principles. One, exploitation and oppression of the workers should be prohibited, should be avoided at all costs. We shouldn't immigrate, we shouldn't allow workers into the society to immigrate, even if it's a benefit, overall benefit to the society, if those workers will be exploited. And this happens around the world, that people are brought into various countries and then exploited for their labor. That would seem to be unfair. The second constraint is that again, the choice should not be based upon ethnic or racial or gender characteristics. We shouldn't discriminate based upon those ascriptive characteristics in terms of even economic benefit. So gender, race, ethnicity, religion, culture should not be a limiting factor in the immigration of workers. Usually these principles can work in combination, and often do work in combination. Questions? Those seem to be the general principles of consideration here for us. The law can be quite detailed. I think I'm not a lawyer, but the law seems very detailed. But these principles seem to drive the law in many cases. And they give shape to the question, or are an answer to the question, who belongs? So our task as citizens is to develop an opinion and a justification for where we stand on these questions of who belongs. And many of the principles are an attempt to go beyond, to transcend our tribalism and to a more morally fair point of view. Questions? Comments? I must be an incredibly clear speaker. I have this power of conveying complete understanding to those who listen to me. So it seems. I'm messing with you. You don't have many questions. You should have questions. This is a lot to take in, I realize. So let's move to standing, the question of standing, unequal standing or equal standing. How should we arrange our status? On what basis should our status or standing in the society as citizens be? Should we have equal standing? Should every citizen be an equal, have equal rights and equal duties? Should they stand equally before the law? Should they have equal rights before the law? Should they have equal rights to participate in the politics of the society? Should they have equal rights to even stand for election and for office in the society? Should they have equal opportunity in terms of social opportunity, in terms of work, employment, education, etc., healthcare? And this question dovetails with the later question of who gets what, the question of distributive justice, which we'll explore. There's a connection here. So that's the question of standing, or should that be determined unequally? Should we have unequal standing? That is, should we have a hierarchy of standing? And on what basis should we have this hierarchy of standing? Should some individuals have more political power, or more opportunity, or more, or should we limit office holding to certain kinds of people? Should you have to have a college degree to run for office, for example? That would create a hierarchy, right, for political office, etc. So that's a basic question of standing. Should it be equal, roughly? And this will, even if we have equal standing, there will be inequalities inevitably in the society. Some people will inevitably make more money than others because of their special talents or their hard work, etc. Some people will have special talents that translate into a higher position in the society, but all on the basis of an equal opportunity. Or should we have a kind of class system, political class system, economic class system, social class system, a hierarchy? And most of human history is most human societies have been hierarchical in this sense. That some people are more talented, are better, are superior to others, and therefore deserve, as a matter of justice, it is argued, deserve a higher social status. So that's the question of standing. And what would be fair? Is equal standing or unequal standing most fair? It's a very important question. Right? And we as a society have a long history of a hierarchical society, even though we proclaimed in our values and our principles to be equal, we have deliberately suffered under the weight of hierarchy based upon race, ethnicity, economic, social class, gender. Up until recently in our history, women, for example, were barred. And to some degree they still are. There's still this glass ceiling phenomenon from many professions. And even from equal political citizenship. 1920, women got the vote in the United States. Before that, they had no political rights. And even before that, they were considered the property of their husbands or their fathers or their brothers. Some male patriarchal figure would literally in the law own them. Own them. No rights. No rights to property. That's pretty shocking. And African Americans, of course, have labored under this white supremacy and its hierarchy since the inception of the country. We've made some progress there as well as on the gender front, but it's not complete, is it? We still have those tendencies. And also working economic class has been a factor. And the identification of people based upon their economic class has been a prominent factor in determining the hierarchy of our society and many other societies. Almost all societies have been hierarchical. The hope is from a point of view of justice and fairness that we could move toward greater equality of standing. And if there's any inequality, that has to be justified based upon fair opportunity. So that's the question of standing in a general way. I would presume you would vote for equal standing, but unequal standing is always there. That's always the choice. And it gets complicated because there are different characteristics that we could point to say, well, you should be up here and you should be in the middle and you should be on the bottom, based upon some characteristic. Now, if it's based upon our merit, and if it's a fair and equal playing ground, equal opportunity, then any inequality may be justifiable from a moral point. But that's difficult to achieve. What's the best predictor of educational attainment? Or what's the best predictor of a score on the ACT or the SAT? They're purported to measure aptitude, right? So one would say, well, one's scholarly aptitude is the best predictor of the scholarly aptitude test. That would be logical. Turns out not to be the case. Not the best predictor. What do you think that predictor is, that variable is? To predict, but over millions of cases, one's ACT or SAT score. Or even one's educational attainment, whether one achieves a college degree or a higher professional degree. What do you think the best predictor is?
Is it race?
Yeah.
Race?
Just because I'm thinking about like standardized testing, like you always have to fill it out.
Yeah. Race is implicated, but it's not the overall predictor. It's connected to another factor. Race itself is not the best predictor, although there's a lot of racial discrimination in education.
Can it be ethnicity?
Ethnicity?
Yeah.
It's a factor, but it's not the best predictor. Ethnicity. Neither is gender. The best predictor is family income. The best predictor of these test performance on the ACT and SAT is family income. Tell me your family's income, I can tell you your score. There are exceptions, of course. There are people from low income families who do quite well, people from high-income families who do quite poorly on the test. But overall, over millions of cases, statistically at least, the best measure or predictive measure is family income. And this is true, this has been true for generations, since the beginning of the test, generation after generation. Family income. What does that tell us? What is the test measuring? And that test is a gateway, is a ticket, right, to entry into a selective college, for example, which then is a ticket to entry into a professional school or a high-paying job. So it becomes class reproductive, right? Reproduces itself over time, generation after generation. So it's difficult to, it's an impediment to social mobility, although there are exceptions, of course. You might be an exception. But overall, looking at the whole scenario, and that would suggest a hierarchy in unequal opportunity, because family income shouldn't determine our educational opportunity, should it? From a democratic or justice or fair point of view. Should family income be the measure? It's a signal, right? Something's amiss here. Something's gone astray in how the system, the institution is working. And that institution could, we could argue, be unfair and therefore unjust because it's working this way. It doesn't give everyone an equal chance. It doesn't treat everyone as an equal. We would have reason to reject it. Valid reason to reject it. And ask for its reform.
I was just gonna say that, like, that's just like showing that there's like an inequality like in the education system. So like the schools that are in like lower income communities are just not getting the same like level of education than like the upper class communities.
That's right.
And that's just like perpetuating
Yeah.
that like continuous cycle that is happening.
That's exactly right. And when you throw in how we finance schools, generally, by property valuations, the amount of money that goes to school is determined by the tax base based on property taxes. So wealthier communities generate a lot more funding than poorer communities for schooling. And that makes all the difference. Although they tend to deny, oh, money doesn't matter. Right. Tell me about it. Money always matters, especially in schooling. You know, you can attract the best teachers, for example. If you're going to start, if you're a teacher coming out of college, you have a choice to teach in a school making $35,000 to start, or you have a choice to go to a school where you're going to start at $65,000. And the kids are privileged, be easier to teach them. Where are you going to go? Unless you have some special moral calling to help the disadvantaged, you're going to choose, on average, the affluent school. You're going to make more. It's going to be of great benefit to you. You're going to make, it's rational. It would be rational to, I used to, years ago now, teach in outside of New York City at a college on Long Island, and in a teacher education program. And there were graduating students who were getting employed, very good jobs in school districts on the North Shore of Long Island, which is very wealthy. They were starting at a higher salary than I was making as a professor. I was fresh out of college. I thought, what is going on here? And there was like a $30,000 or $40,000 gap between teachers, what teachers were making in New York City and what they were making on Long Island. And so, everyone, of course, all the students, well, I want to teach in Great Neck. I want to start at 70,000. I want to top out at 150,000 at the end of my career, or 200,000 as a teacher. That's wonderful, right? We should be paying teachers high salaries, but the problem is in the inequality, and that reproduces itself and creates generational inequality over time, leading to a hierarchical society, economically, politically, socially. I got off there on a tangent on educational inequality, but it's important, right? Something you can relate to. It's shocking, isn't it? When you first hear that, wow, family income, really? Not intelligence, not aptitude, not hard work, not gender, not race, not ethnicity. Family income, social class, economic class. So the choice here is, should we pursue a principle of equal standing, or is unequal standing somehow justifiable from a normative point of view? One should consider that. So with all these questions, we're, again, using the framework of fairness as our standard, the criteria upon which we can justify our principles of justice in response to basic questions of justice. We're using the elements of fairness as the standard of what would be justifiable. So we're asking, in terms of equal recognition, does the principle recognize and treat all persons as equals, in principle? In terms of reciprocity, does the principle apply to all affected? Is it acceptable to all? Do reasonable persons have valid reason to reject it? In terms of and that impartiality, does it unfairly favor anyone? Is it biased? Is the principle itself biased in favor of some person or some group of persons? Or does it serve the common good? Is it commonly good? Is it good for all in an impartial way? These are our basic questions of fairness, and we can ask them to justify our choice of principle. And we can apply that to the principles of citizenship, of immigration, etc. So one of the big questions here is, of course, as we've discussed, should ascriptive characteristics determine who belongs? Ascriptive characteristics such as ethnicity, race, religion, gender, perhaps sexual orientation, etc. Which we could argue from the moral point of view are arbitrary. They have no moral status, or shouldn't have moral status. That would be the point of view of fairness. Such ascriptive characteristic should not be determinant in questions of justice. Okay.